The Illuminate Arts and Faith Conference in Chattanooga, Tennessee wants to help you find your tribe. Do you get way too excited about quoting Wendell Berry or C.S. Lewis in conversations with coworkers? Does your Spotify playlist include hymns, a little jazz, and a whole lot of Andrew Peterson? Join your tribe at Illuminate March 31 and April 1 for education and inspiration from speakers Russ Ramsey, Douglas McKelvey, John Hendricks, and others. Find a complete list of session topics and ticket information at southern.edu/illuminate.
In 2024, I set out to meet as many poets as I could and spend an hour with each one. I got more than I bargained for, more insight, more clarity, more hope. It's proved to be one of the richest highlights of my life. 17 writers, 17 deeply human conversations that made me sit up and pay attention. Franz Kafka once said, if the book we're reading doesn't wake us up with a blow to the head, what are we reading for? A book must be the axe for the frozen sea within us. And that's what I hope this new book will do. I hope it wakes us up, my friends. I hope these conversations will be the catalyst for something to be reawakened, re-enchanted, and reinvigorated. It's called An Axe for the Frozen Sea, Conversations with Poets About What Matters Most. I'm Ben Palpin, and I hope you'll come and listen in as I spend a little time with poets like Lucy Shaw, Malcolm Guite, Dana Gioia, and Lee Young Lee. Pull up a chair at the table as we dig into what it means to write well and to live well. An Axe for the Frozen Sea is now available from Rabbit Room Press. Visit the store at rabbitroom.com, or better yet, ask about it at your favorite bookseller.
This episode is brought to you by Jane Austen. Okay, that's not actually true. This episode is brought to you by Writing with Jane Austen, a new 6-week online creative writing course taught by me, Jonathan Rogers. Starting April 6th, we'll read through Pride and Prejudice together. Then we'll examine how Jane Austen works her particular kind of magic, and then we'll apply those principles to our own writing. You can find out more at thehabit.co/Jane. Welcome to the Hobbit podcast, conversations with hobbits about breakfast. I'm Jonathan Rogers, your host. Every time I've ever seen the poet Malcolm Guite, he's been wearing a waistcoat. He smokes a long-stemmed pipe and blows smoke rings. He often ambles about in the countryside. He's not very tall. He loves breakfast. And I think I've seen a picture of him going barefoot in public. I leave you to draw your own conclusions. Malcolm Guite, thank you so much for being on the Hobbit podcast today.
I'm delighted to join you.
I think where we surely need to start, and where I think my listeners will be especially interested to know, are you more Baggins or Tuke?
Well, I think there's a bit of Baggins and a bit of Tuke in me, and it depends on the circumstances. When it comes to a nice warm fireside, the kettle just beginning to sing, and the prospect of a large breakfast, undisturbed by nuisance visitors, I'm definitely a Baggins. But on the other hand, I do have a sense of adventure. I like to read the stories of knight errantry, and I imagine myself occasionally having the freedom and will to just pull on an old cloak and saddle an older pony and go out seeking a few adventures. So there's a bit of both, I think.
I think a poet has to be a little bit Tukish, right? You can't. A poet has to be somewhat Tukish. You have to go out in the world and see.
Absolutely. But of course, Bilbo was a Baggins with a good deal of Tuke in him, but he certainly had a good deal of poetry in him, as did his heir Frodo.
Yeah.
I find poetry comes first and you degenerate into prose a little bit later.
Okay. Yeah, that sounds about right. You mentioned breakfast, and so this is something I've never been able to sort out. If there's breakfast and second breakfast and elevensies and then lunch, how early does one have to start first breakfast in order to be able to squeeze in second breakfast and elevensies before lunch?
Yeah. Well, of course, opinion is divided on this. In my view, second breakfast is the great meal. So when I get up, I might have a little something by way of a first breakfast, take the edge off the hunger a little, light repast, one or two nice things, and then perhaps one or two more. But then you go for a walk, don't you? You take out your stout stick. You breathe the morning air. Perhaps you even have that morning pipe. And by the time you come back, then you've worked up an appetite for a proper second breakfast, which, of course, you know, if you've got the likes of Sam Gamgee to help you with the foraging and cooking, is going to involve not only bacon and eggs and sausages, but plenteous mushrooms. Right. And well, the Shire is the Shire, but England, where I am, is full of shires, and the different shires have got different sausages. There's Lincolnshire sausages and there's Cumberland sausages, and so you've got the variety there. And I have to say, I like a little bit of fried bread and occasionally some sort of cakes of potato and cabbage thrown in there as well. Depends on how much room there is in the pan on the one hand, the plate on the other, and finally the happy breakfaster.
This is second breakfast we're talking about.
That's second breakfast, yeah.
Yeah. And then what happens at 11sies?
Well, by the time you've finished second breakfast and washed up, you're probably wanting another breath of fresh air and possibly a more meditative morning pipe.
Oh, right.
Coffee, perhaps.
Yeah.
Of course, 11 is a magic hour because it's reasonable if you happen to have a pint of decent ale to start one at about 11. Right. And what you want really at 11s, I think, is something like biscuits and cheese.
Okay.
I have to say the combination, maybe it's to do with some forms of liveliness in yeast working, but the combination of a really strong, crumbly, vintage cheddar cheese with a good, tangy, well-hopped real ale is something that makes 11 o'clock worth going through.
Right. You know, there are people who can be censorious about ale drinking before noon. Right.
Oh, I think
how do you address those people?
Well, the sun must be above the yardarm, is what we say.
Okay.
Good. To Navy slang here. That the sun has to be high enough that it's above the cross tree of the mast, and I reckon 11 o'clock is good. Of course, it depends on the season, and if you go a bit of north, and there's a good deal of the northern in me, the sun gets a bit higher in the summer, earlier in the day. So sometimes it can even, well, certainly 11 is safe. Because by the time you get to noon and you're towards one, mine has already turned to lunch.
Right.
And, you know, the great thing about the 11 o'clock, 11's ale, I mean, you could have coffee if you were driven to it, but if you happen to have a pint, and the thing is, if you've got real ale in a barrel, it doesn't last forever. Well, there's a certain moral duty to drink it while it's good and not see it go to waste. Sure. Be an insult to brewers.
Yeah, that makes sense. I get that. But are we cleaning up between each of these, between first breakfast and second breakfast and 11sies and lunch?
Well, of course, it rather depends on whether you happen to have a troop of handy dwarfs to do the dishes for you.
Right.
But if not, yes, you are. You're pottering about. Really, the forenoon, as we used to call it, you know, mornings weren't invented for industry. They were invented for pottering. And so you potter back and forth between the kitchen and your study and the little bench you have outside, catch the morning breeze. And yes, you do this as you go along. Okay. It's dreadful to have the whole clatter of unwashed dishes late in the day, just when you are wanting to sit down to a meditative pipe and perhaps a sip of something stronger. The dishes still to be done. Better to keep up with them while you're going.
Well, your remarks remind me of something that the American journalist John Gunter said. He said, "All happiness depends on a leisurely breakfast." Do you agree? Yes,
well, it's a foundational meal, isn't it? Of course, the good, what we in England call the full English. I love that phrase. Yeah. You can go to a cafe and, you know, will you have the continental, so-called, which is just
don't get me started.
A light croissant, a few little bits of, you know, egg on the side. But the full English is a large plate with everything on it. I like the fullness of it. I like the sort of sense of moreness and plusness and abundance in it. And of course, the origin of the full English is there with the kind of, you know, the jolly whistling ploughman and the farmer and the person who's actually got up very early to milk the cows or to go out and lay the hedges or gathering the eggs from the hens or whatever. You've done a bit of work and breathing. And so you need a decent breakfast. And that, of course, is your foundation and keeps you going for the day. And when you're working on the land, of course, lunch itself has to be light. You might just have a couple of Scotch eggs and perhaps a Cornish pasty tucked into your roll and a bottle of something, but it's not a full set meal. So your breakfast or your two breakfasts have got to keep you going.
Yeah. Do you ever eat fish for breakfast?
They used to serve it at school occasionally. I say I can't really get used to it. I mean, kippers, smoked kippers, if you can get really good smoked kippers. There's a place up in Northumberland called Craster where they still smoke kippers in the old-fashioned way. Somebody once, there's another place in Suffolk. Somebody once took an image of me. I sat down by an old fisherman's hut on the beach in Aldborough and lit up my pipe, not grasping that just above me were the words written in white paint on against the wooden wall. It said, "We smoke fish here."
Is a kipper is like a little sardine or something, a little small fish?
Yeah, it's a herring.
It's a herring. Okay.
It used to be. So a herring, it's a herring which has been filleted and then hung up in wonderful thick oak smoke for weeks, and it gives it an extraordinary flavour, wonderful. I mean, kippers are quite strong flavoured anyway, but I know some sophisticated people eat salmon for breakfast, but
right.
I think you want something a little tangier and heartier.
Yeah.
A little delicate salmon at supper is another matter.
When I was growing up, my family tended to fry fish on special occasions for breakfast. So Christmas morning, maybe somebody would come home from a trip, we would have fried fish and grits for breakfast.
Well, that's very nice. Fried fish is always a good thing. We tend to keep that for lunch or supper and fry it in batter, good old fish and chips.
Yeah.
Gamgee was partial to fish and chips.
I am too. Okay. By the way, I think we will release at least part of this as videos. So can you? Do you have enough smoke left in your pipe to blow us some rings, Malcolm?
Right, man, is that? Yeah, let's see what we can do.
Here we go. Oh, yeah. We are approaching Gandalf level. Can you do rings within rings, Malcolm?
Just done, I think, one just towards there. Because the best thing, really, for rings within rings is when you've been several people smoking a pipe in a room in the evening and there's quite a lot of smoke in the atmosphere. And then the ring, as it rolls through the air, picks up the ambient smoke that's already there and becomes a stronger ring and sort of stays up there. And then you can really go for it. You'll see how we're doing.
Okay.
There we are.
Beautiful. Beautiful.
I knew I could count on you. And I think it's a sudden galleon.
Yeah. What is it? You had mentioned something that Tolkien said in one of his letters about him, that he was himself a hobbit.
Yeah. Well, he was asked, somebody wrote about hobbits, and he sort of listed some certain characteristics. He said, well, something like, I am somebody who in this rather dull modern age still likes to wear waist-coloured waistcoats. I am sometimes, I'm more than overly fond of my victuals, and I like a good breakfast. I like comfortable living. I like warm firesides. I like conviviality, hospitality, a walk in the countryside leaning on a stout stick. So you could say, to that extent, I am a hobbit, or words to that effect. And obviously, in fact, Tolkien put many of his own pleasures, and the pleasures that he shared with Lewis, walking and smoking and talking, are very much part of that. And the great thing there is they're part of the general goodness. If you ask, these great epic battles, what are they for? they're not so that you can spend your time on the heights fighting epic battles and smiting, they're so that you can preserve the peace in which any good person can go down to the Green Dragon at Bywater and pick up a flagon of ale in peace, light a pipe and tell tales with his friends.
Yeah.
Those other great epic things are to preserve this simple, solid, earthy, ordinary, unpretentious, in some respects, humble goodness.
Yeah.
A contentedness in things. I mean, perhaps, one might, I have been known occasionally to overdo breakfast, but I mean, nobody's harmed by that but myself. But people who overdo aggression and pride and glory and the acquisition of land and goods do immense harm. And if they'd stayed at home and simply had a second breakfast rather than going out to slay and conquer, we'd all be happier.
Yeah. Yeah, you sound like Thorin at the end of The Hobbit.
Yeah. Well, I think, Thorin speaks some wisdom there that he learned the hard way, Saruman tells Gandalf that the pipe weed that he's learnt to smoke from the hobbits has addled his brains. But on the contrary, it's the simple joys of sharing a pipe with Bilbo that have kept his feet on the ground and stopped him from the ludicrous, proud follies of Saruman.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, Malcolm, may we all live in a world of such simple pleasures and earthy pleasures, and may we know what to do with these. I love what you said about it's appropriate to drink the ale while it's at its best. It's you're honoring the ale maker.
You are indeed, yeah.
And so may we all live that way.
I once, one of my visits to your country, I one of the things that made me say yes immediately to the proposal, which was it was a C.S. Lewis festival in Petoskey, I think, was that when they sent me the schedule, the very first event was at a place called Beard's Brewery. I thought, Beards and brewery, as they say in your country, what's not to like?
You don't say that in your country?
We don't use, well, I think some people use the phrase what's not to. It's a slightly odd construction, isn't it?
It is.
Yeah. Anyway, I think you honor the cook, by eating what she sets before you and delighting in it, and you honor the brewer by drinking the ale at its best,
Yeah.
And, you honor the poet by reciting their poems slowly rather than speed reading them.
I love it. Well, Malcolm Guite, thank you. May the hair on your toes never fall out.
Yes, well, thank you. And I'm sure I wish the same to you. And I expect your second breakfast is cooking now.
Yes, it's. I'm got to get ready for it. So thanks.
Thank you.
This podcast is brought to you by The Rabbit Room, where art nourishes community and community nourishes art. And all our podcasts are made possible by the generous support of our members. To learn more about us, visit rabbitroom.com, and to become a member, rabbitroom.com/donate. Special thanks as well to Taylor Linhart for letting us use her song Diamonds as the theme music for Season 3 of the Habit podcast. You can learn more about Taylor and follow her work at taylorlinhart.com.
The Habit membership is a library of resources for writers by me, Jonathan Rogers. More importantly, The Habit is a hub of community where like-minded writers gather to discuss their work and give each other a little more courage. Find out more at thehabit.co.
If you've enjoyed this podcast episode, consider joining the Rabbit Room membership. Your membership helps sustain this community, funding everything from publishing and podcasts and theater productions to events and programs that support artists who create with a Christ-centered vision. We'd love to have you on board. Learn more at rabbitroom.com/member.